Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Carroll. I'm the Vice President of Operations at Tech B2B Marketing, and welcome to this episode of the Manufacturing Matters podcast, where we discuss the trends and technologies shaping manufacturing today. On this episode, I have the pleasure of being joined by Rajat Bhageria, who is the president of Chef Robotics. Rajat, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I have been following your company for a while, and I'm really glad to have you on here.
Yeah, same here, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on. Excited for this conversation.
Yeah, of course. It's our pleasure. So I guess for those who don't know, tell us about Chef Robotics and your company and your mission. And I'll before you jump in, I'll say, like, there's so many companies today where the name of the company might not necessarily reflect what they do, and it's a little bit unclear, but I love how yours isn't.
It's very clear. Yeah. So we at Chef make AI-enabled robots for the food industry, as you can probably tell. Specifically, we're starting with food manufacturing. So that's a little bit different than a lot of other food robotics companies. I'm sure you've heard of many of these that are in, let's say, restaurant settings or even making their own restaurant that are tech-enabled. We really thought that the best kind of go-to-market for robotics has to be manufacturing. Of course, as you very well know, robots have been around in manufacturing for a while. What we're basically doing is adding a lot more intelligence to these robots. One way we kind of talk about this is like, there's a lot of automation that works well in low mix manufacturing. Like if I'm Nestle or if I'm Coca-Cola or PepsiCo or something like that, right? You have very high volumes, relatively low mixes. And so traditional kind of automations work quite well. Where we're seeing a gap in the market is really high mix automation, right? If you have, for example, a prepared meal manufacturer or a salad manufacturer, yogurt parfait, sandwiches, these kinds of products, these kind of meals, basically, they have a lot of SKUs. They might have 200 SKUs. And, if you have that many SKUs, you're not going to have 200 dedicated pieces of equipment or lines. And so what you end up doing is using people. But of course, there's a big labor shortage. And so it's really hard to fill these roles. And it's actually one of the biggest labor shortages in the world. And so that's where we can kind of come in and say, okay, well, let's make this kind of AI-enabled robot that can be in a similar flexibility to a person. It's obviously not the same as a person, but a similar flexibility to a person, while providing the performance of a machine. So that's kind of broadly what we're doing today. The vision of the company really is to say, okay, well, how do we one day get to robots in every commercial kitchen in the country and the world? And again, we really think that starting in manufacturing is the right go-to-market, because by deploying robots in manufacturing, we're really getting kind of in production training data, right? Where our models are learning how to, let's say, pick up cherry tomatoes and not crush them, or how to pick up diced chicken without damaging it, or pick up some cheese and spread it over a tray so it doesn't clump up. We're learning how to manipulate food, basically. And if we can learn how to manipulate food really well, why can't we use that same technology and apply it to Chipotle or Sweet Green or Ghost Kitchen for delivery orders? So really the vision is kind of scaling to different parts of the food supply chain, but starting in manufacturing.
Yeah, so there's so many follow-up questions there that I'd like to ask, but it's interesting because flexibility in automation, it's something that's like sort of an obvious term. Everybody wants a system that can handle multiple different products or even be repurposed in the future if need be. And that's obviously not limited to the food space.
Yes.
And you mentioned labor shortage, and that continues to impact manufacturers of all types, and it probably will continue to. And you mentioned, food manufacturing. That's one of the biggest gaps in terms of labor shortage. In the food space, automation has been there. Automation has been present in the food space for quite a long time, obviously, with things like traceability and scanning and things like that, or maybe more traditional inspections, like looking at dented cans or something like that. But in what you're talking about, things you're talking about. Big challenge there. And in the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years, there's a number of folks out there that are identifying the food and beverage space as being sort of like ripe for growth in automation. And that is a pun that I intended to use. So that by feeling, I guess, like, what's the best way to phrase it? Can you talk about the problems that you see in the market, in the food, in automating some of what you're doing in the food space, and why automation in food is so challenging?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, like, you're right. I mean, I think, like, the food industry actually historically has a ton of automation, just given the volumes. I mean, like, the amount of the kind of number of products some of these manufacturers are creating is insane. And actually, like, a lot of other industries, like, for example, even Tesla, like when they were building up the gigafactories, a lot of the inspiration was actually food, right? Just because it's actually relatively automated. One nuance to that, I would say, is that a lot of the automation is kind of a lot of the automation is kind of secondary packaging. So let's say the food is in a tray. Now, each of the trays or a cup or whatever, a can or what have you, right? Each kind of can or tray is the same. It doesn't matter whether it's a pasta meal or a rice meal or what have you, or what kind of soup is inside. It's more homogeneous, if you will. So you can have kind of case packing and palletizers and tray sealers and all the other kind of things, because it's kind of a relatively homogeneous input. Those kind of products and automation systems don't really care about what's inside, if you will. There's also a lot of, call it automation, call it machines, if you will, kind of pre-assembly. So like in the cooking process and the prepping process, if you would go to some of our customers, you'd find giant pieces of equipment that can like, peel, for example, pineapples or something, or you want you have tons of leafy greens and you want to just wash the leafy greens and remove any impurities, just clean them from any dirt, or maybe you want to take 50 potatoes and just cut them any way you might want. There's actually relatively decent amount of automation in the pre-assembly process. And like I said, the secondary packaging process, the thing that is missing, I think, is primary packaging. Even within primary packaging, and again, it's diving a little bit into nuances, but like even within primary packaging, low mix primary packaging is also kind of fairly automated, right? There's a lot of traditional kinds of dispensing, whether it's kind of vertical form systems, or it's pneumatic systems, or gravity fed systems, or multi-headed dispensers. There's many kind of augers. There's many different kinds of vibratory feeds. There's lots of different kinds of these. The nuance, of course, is that each of these will work for a single SKU, or maybe one or two or three SKUs. And if you cut or cook the food a little bit differently, it might not be very consistent. It will still do the ingredient, but it's not very consistent, right? If that makes sense. And then, of course, there's certain ingredients that they just can't do. So, one of our customers, they tried some of these traditional pieces of automation for something as simple as rice. But these systems would actually break the grain of rice. And that was something that they took a lot of pride in, like, hey, we really don't want to break the grain of rice. Other of our customers have curries with meat suspended in them, which, traditional automation, it just can't do it. Or they might be doing something like really sticky, like, imagine like a cheesy queso or something. So basically there's like, why doesn't the traditional automation work in all the cases? Well, sometimes it just can't do it, like the examples I gave. Sometimes it can do it, but it takes too long to clean it. So imagine like a sauce. There's obviously a lot of sauce dispensers. That's like a classic example. You want to put some marinara sauce on your pasta dish. Okay, great, get a dispenser. Well, fine, but if you're going to be doing 5 changeovers per day on the line, it's not like that dispenser is running for an 8-hour shift. It's running for 30 minutes, hour, 2 hours, and it's going to take 3 hours to clean the thing. So probably you just want to use people. Right. So sometimes it's like, okay, you can do the ingredient. It technically can work, but it's just not a realistic or feasible option. And the third thing is really back to flexibility. It's just, there's too many things you need to do throughout the day. Like that station 1 on the assembly line, you're doing leafy greens, and then you're doing a single chicken breast. Then you're doing 3 cherry tomatoes, accountable. Then you might be doing some pulled pork. You get the point. Like, there's so much variance that, you can maybe get a dispenser to do 1 or 2 or 3 of those, but it's not going to do every one of those. And so they end up using people. So high mix, broadly speaking, when you have, for example, prepared meals or salads and stuff, that's really where we see literally hundreds, sometimes thousands of people under the same roof, kind of manually assembling meals in a 34-degree room. Really hard job. And that's really where we see a great opportunity. I gave all these qualifiers. It's like, it's not in prepping and cooking. It's not in secondary. It's this primary packaging. And within primary packaging, it's like high mix. It feels like there's all these qualifiers. The thing with food is just like, it's so huge. It's just one of the biggest industries on planet Earth, literally, that like anything you pick is a giant market. So that's kind of what got us excited.
Yeah, when you run into so many problems too with like organic variability, and it's like the whole ecosystem is vast in terms of what you might be touching or inspecting or handling or whatever. One kind of common thread that I've noticed in the industrial automation space, again, not just limited to food, but very much in food as well, is a lot of times today when people say our system is flexible, to some extent, or at least in a lot of cases, that means that they're leveraging AI. And in your case, right, where does AI come into play for you? Because in my opinion, like it's the idea of like so-called blind robots are very useful if they're doing pre-programmed tasks. But if you add cameras, oftentimes in food, it's 3D. You're adding 3D cameras. There's a whole nother layer of flexibility. And you add AI on top of that. Well, now you can handle all these different types of parts and products and food products too. So for you guys, like where does AI come into play, and how do you think that might open new doors in food automation?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, like the key innovation with Chef is truly AI. I mean, to be honest, like a lot of the hardware we're using is off the shelf, right? You know, robot arms, like you said, RGBD cameras, D as in depth cameras, CPUs, GPUs, weigh scales. So a lot of the hardware is off the shelf. We are designing a lot of our own end-of-arm tooling, but the reason I kind of call this out is because you were correct. The key innovation is AI. So now, why do we need that? I think there's at least a few different layers. The crux of it is, of course, like you said, the ingredients. First of all, as you correctly said, it's organic. That in and of itself, the same exact ingredient, literally batch by batch, in the same day. I mean, you're not doing one batch. It's lots of different. Like imagine you're doing meat, right? Like every chicken is a little bit different. So there's just natural variation in different parts, but also different birds. So natural variation. Every single day, it's cut by a human. The same human's going to cut it differently. And by the way, you and I are going to cut it differently. And there's often dozens of people cutting material. So cooking. Every single day, it's being cooked by a human, at least semi-cooked, right? And like I said, there's a lot of automation, but still, there's a human partially involved. There's going to be variation. I mean, just to give you some kind of simple examples, rice is not rice per se every day. It's a little bit more dense, it's a little bit more sticky, it's a little bit more lesser, more wet, what have you. And then, of course, if you're trying to get the right target weight, it's picking the same volume is not going to get you the same outcome. Or even sometimes using the same utensil, because if it's extra sticky, well, you got to do something different. So that's another example. So all of this can be, AI can really help you, for example, in the ingredient variations. If you can have generated a topography, a 3D topography of, let's say, the pan of food, then you can get a sense of, okay, like, kind of where are we? Like, what does the pan topography look like? Then once you actually pick, you get some data from the robot. You get some force torque measurements, you get pick weight data, and you can say, okay, well, let me change the policy of how the robot's picking the next time a little bit. So that's kind of part one. Broadly, there's a lot more nuance in the picking. I mean, we literally have dozens, hundreds of parameters of how to manipulate every single ingredient. That is the hardest thing. Each ingredient is so variable. And within an ingredient, it's variable. But then there's also another few layers, right? So portion sizes. It's actually not as simple as you might think. It's not like going from 50 grams of cucumbers is the same as 150 grams. There's actually some variations, because if you have 150 grams, for example, you might need a different tool, and that tool interaction with the food is slightly different, and it might have different standard deviations, for example. So how do you still get consistency as the portion sizes vary is another hard problem. A third problem that I could kind of talk about is, okay, now you've you've picked the ingredient, you've gotten the right portion size. Okay, now how do you actually generate the trajectory such that you don't spill the food or fling the food? Okay, so now you have to have the right kind of trajectory generation algorithms to be able to do that. So that's another part where AI can be really helpful. Another part is, okay, now you have to place. And when you place, every single customer has a slightly different conveyor. Some of them are multiple lanes. Some of them are not. Some of them are one lane. Some of them are sloped. Like literally food factories have water, they're sloped. The floors are sloped for water drainage. So, you have to place lower or higher based on the slope of the floor. Sometimes these conveyors get pushed. And so now they're skewed. So it's not like flush with the robot. So now you have to see that and you have to detect that. Now that could be an error, but our robots are intelligent enough to deal with that. Sometimes the operator speeds up the conveyor. And so now the velocity is like just ramping or it's decelerating, or maybe they like just stop it, hard stop. And you don't want to just dumbly place food onto the conveyor. So there's a lot of work to like work with different kinds of conveyors and colors and slopes and heights, and without making custom software or hardware. It's all vision-based, right? So that's another example. The final example I can kind of give is like, okay, different trays. So even if you have different conveyors, you might have different trays. So how do you build a system that can work with clear trays and black trays and insert trays and compartment trays and non-compartment trays, but you're still having to place in different components of parts of it. So there's just so many layers to this. It's actually a lot harder than it meets the eye. I mean, even for us, like we were like, oh yeah, this seems like a perfect problem for robots. But then you actually like get into the weeds and like, there's so much variation in the physical world, especially with food, because it's so inordinately variable.
Oh yeah, I mean, even the idea of like general purpose. Well, I didn't say general purpose, but bin picking. The idea of bin picking. It's like that technology has been around a long time, but it's still like very very challenging for a lot of different people. Not in food, and in
Yes.
food, like opens up this whole new world of issues.
Yes.
Where it just becomes
At least in bin picking, like your iPhone is your iPhone is your iPhone. The box is the box is the box. Here
Yeah.
it's like literally every day the ingredients are a little bit different.
Yeah,
and you can be building custom stuff for that.
For sure, yeah, and that's what I was going to say is like, and in the general, because I'm interested in your opinion, sort of like in general industry trends too, right? AI has helped some of these companies that work in like warehouses, for example, be able to handle instead of just a couple of SKUs, maybe hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands. Yep. What are some other ways that you because we talk so much about AI on this podcast, and I'm certain that you do too, both within your professional life and with your family and friends. Like, it's such a hot topic. Everybody wants to know about AI and what it means. And from the industrial sense, in general manufacturing and logistics, warehousing, whatever, what are some other ways that you see AI really adding value these days?
To be honest, I think it's going to be used in every part of the supply chain. I think Andrew Nung, he's a Stanford professor, he's kind of compared AI to electricity. And I think that's a really kind of fair comparison, right? Like electricity, if you zoom out, it led to for example, it allowed, for example, the light bulb to happen. It allowed from electric power to happen. It like literally transformed every industry. It wasn't this like little siloed thing. It's kind of like a tool that affects everything. And I think that's 100% true for manufacturing and industrials as well. So some examples I can give. In our customers, as well as most manufacturing, there's some people at the end of the line doing QA. That's a very manual job, and of course sometimes they can catch defects and sometimes they can't. And as you've called out, the food industry actually already has a lot of kind of defect detection and QA systems, but they're getting a lot more intelligent, let's just say, right? And being able to deal with lots of different SKUs. So now, there's a lot of these companies that are installing camera systems that have depth as well, and you can train them with AI models. And now you can do a lot more robust QA inspection, which of course increases yield and kind of protects your inventory, but also it reduces labor, or at least reallocates labor, which I think is really, really nice. I also think generally just like data. One thing that's kind of interesting. So Chef is based in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Like data is everywhere. Every startup, every company is kind of immersed in data, right? But then, I visit a lot of our customers and they're still running on spreadsheets and sometimes even pieces of paper, literally, to plan out the production. So I just think that this data part of it is really powerful. I'll give you a practical example from us, and I think it's applicable. Like a lot of our customers, they'll have checkwares at the end. So it's like a checkware might say, okay, how much weight is in the tray? Did you get the right weight? Because of course, the end customer, the consumer who's eating the meal, doesn't want whatever, not enough rice or protein or what have you. Okay, great. But now you're getting the weight at the end of the tray. You don't know if the rice was more the rice was too low and the meat was too high, which of course is kind of eating into your margins. You just have no idea. With Chef and robots, we are getting data on every single pick on every single ingredient. So it's literally like 8 to 9x. If there's 8 to 9 different ingredients, you're getting 8 to 9x more data on your lines. And by the way, that's weight data, but you can parse it a different way and say, hey, from that you can drive uptime and planned downtime and unplanned downtime and all of these different metrics, OEE and everything else like that. So I think, okay, so that data allows you to have a lot of insights. That's cool, but it's not crazy new as of now. Manufacturing has had data too. I think what is also cool, though, is you can now leverage that data to do more interesting things around production planning and scheduling. Let's optimize a production schedule for the day. I need to get this much output. I know from historic data, this is how much I've produced, and this is the kind of yields and consistencies and outputs I can get. Let me optimize my schedule for the day. Production planning and scheduling. So it's like, okay, line 1 is going to run these 5 SKUs for this much time. I need this much input to get there. This is the allocation of human resources and people and robot resources or machine resources I'm going to use. That's a giant optimization problem that neural nets are really good for example. Humans can do it too, and traditional software can do it too, but traditional software is more rule-based. ML and AI software can be a little bit more intelligent in coming up with that. I think there's so many examples. We can talk about this all day long. I think again, it's kind of like I really think electricity is the right kind of analogy. It's going to change the fabric of how manufacturing works, because you can just have a lot more insights and data about day-to-day stuff. And then of course, robotics is a big part of it, right? Like how do you, like a lot of traditional automation has been able to solve the low mix task, but even in car manufacturing, like final assembly has a lot of humans, frankly. And I think that's because they're super dexterous tasks, like, putting the wire harness and kind of aligning, like that's a super, super hard task. That's still not solved, by the way. I'm not saying it's done, but I do think innovations, for example, with like imitation learning, where you can have these very, like, you can demonstrate a task instead of writing code about here's how the robot should move. Imagine the human, like a human kind of demonstrates a task, like it does this over and over. And in the car harness example, the human is able to demonstrate, okay, this is how you like put the harness in, and now the robot can mimic it. That idea using imitation learning, which is powered by transformers, which is the same technology that's powering DALI and Sora, can allow for this. So I think like robotics is definitely going to be a big part of it, but generally machine learning and the data side of it is also, I think, a big part of manufacturing and how AI will affect it.
Yeah, that's an awesome response. And I'm so glad that you brought up the Andrew Ng quote, because I tend to quote it on this podcast myself often. And I try not to repeat the same things too much. But I just think it's a really good jumping off point for a lot of people, because I think that, well, let me ask you your opinion, right? Like when you're talking to friends or family or whomever, people that are sort of outside of the general space, and you tell them that you work for an AI company, is there a fear or maybe some level of trepidation? And how do you explain that? And I know that part of it is sensationalized due to like shows like Black Mirror or movies, Ex Machina or The Terminator. And these are all awesome. But like what I try to tell people is like, it's a movie.
Yes, it's fantasy.
Yeah. And AI is really valuable. So from your perspective, like how do you have that conversation with people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you're right. I mean, I think people do have that fear. So I think what I would just say is that the world has gone through a bunch of industrial revolutions. It's like this idea of like forget AI for a second. AI is just automation, right? So like automation is not a new idea. Even like the printing press is automation. Before, like you had to inscribe Bibles and books and stuff, and then the printing press allows you to super quickly copy books. Well, what happened? Well, what happened is that there was a giant influx of people who had access to books. And generally what happens with these things is when there's lower cost, output tends to increase. If output increases, that two effects happen. I think one is on the micro and one's more macro. On the micro level, which is to say the business level, the individual business level, that business is doing well. So they're like, hey, let's print even more books. Great. So now we need to open up a second book printing factory and create more volume. So it actually creates more jobs, right? Our customers have the same thing, by the way. Like if we can actually help them kind of increase yield, let's say, forget like saving costs or anything, just increase yield and output. I mean, they're just going to open up more manufacturing plants. They're going to open up more lines. They're going to create jobs because of it. That's on the micro sense. On the macro sense, let's say everyone in aggregate is doing this, right? We're doing this not just for chef robots, but we're doing this in medicine. We're doing this across the industry, across the world. What happens is as costs reduce, people are spending more. People are spending more money, right? Goods are cheaper, right? There's more abundance, right? You can get food cheaper. You can get construction cheaper if you want to buy a house, whatever. Things get cheaper. As things get cheaper, the economy swells, right? You get more output. You get more GDP. As GDP increases, people feel wealthier. And because they feel wealthier, generally people have a better, like a sense of well-being actually increases. We've seen this a lot of times throughout history, the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution. I don't think this is anything different. So that's what I would just say, just like, another, just kind of bringing like that, these are kind of hypothetical constructs, like kind of bringing it home to reality. Like imagine like social networking. Social networking was not a thing in the early 2000s, right? Facebook happened and then Twitter and then now TikTok and everything else. Now there's people whose full-time job it is to be content creators and social media marketers and SEO optimizers. And imagine how many thousands of jobs have been created, probably millions of jobs have been created because of the advent of social networking. That's not automation per se, but I think it illustrates the point. New technology tends to create jobs. It makes things better for everybody. Final kind of comment I'll say on this is like, at least in the case of Chef, and I think many of our peers, whether it's in construction robotics or agriculture robotics or what have you, right, warehouse robotics, like there's a giant labor shortage. So there's nobody being replaced, right? It's just there's not enough jobs. So I think all of these are fair points, and I think it kind of depends on like where the other person's coming from. But I mean, I honestly, I'm not worried about this. Like being in the industry, like my full sense, like without doubt of without any doubt, is really that it's going to be a giant adder to the economy. Like I think it's going to accelerate the economy on the micro and the macro sense.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, I think NVIDIA, right, is a good example of a company that is sort of propelling. I mean, I know that to some extent that GPUs were initially launched for gaming and they're in computers, general purpose computers. But, these days, GPUs are almost synonymous, at least in the industrial space, with AI, machine learning, right? I mean, NVIDIA in Q4 of last year had a record quarterly revenue of almost 40 billion, which is up 78% from the year before. So like if you want a talking point of like the growth of AI, there it is, right? It's
exactly.
So we've talked a lot about some applications of where Chef is being used, and I know that largely in this space we're bound by NDAs, but are there any examples of customers that allow you to talk openly? I'd love to hear some. I bet you have some fun ones.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I can give you a few examples of kind of what kind of benefits our customers have seen. So one of the ones that I really kind of like a lot is one of our customers called Chef Robotics. They're based in Edmonton, Canada. And this is the customer actually that like I alluded to earlier. Like they had tried a lot of traditional automation for dispensing rice. Didn't work because it kind of cut their rice, kind of broke the grain, and that wasn't okay for them from a quality perspective. And so we decided to partner with them. And the president was thrilled because of a few different ROIs. One is that he made it really clear there's a labor shortage. We're not firing anybody, but now he can reallocate people from the assembly line to do other better tasks. Better as in perhaps even more humane, right? Like doing manual work all day, doing like this motion all day for 8 hours a day is honestly physically extremely taxing, especially because it's a cold room. So now those people are freed up. Two is we were able to increase the average throughput for their lines by around 20%. That is huge. So because now they have 20% extra capacity. So they work with some fairly big retailers as customers, they're a contract manufacturer. I mean, they can literally just produce more volume. I mean, so whatever the cost of Chef might be, like they like more than made that up in spades because of the increased revenue and volume. And I think, by the way, like I think just zooming out, I think some of the best businesses are the businesses that like create revenue more than they cut costs. So like Uber, for example, it's again, not manufacturing, but just to kind of illustrate the point, Uber creates revenue for people. I mean, you or I can drive Uber and we get money, right? And I think the best businesses create revenue more than they cut costs. I think that's a good kind of proxy. So I think for this customer, like we were able to create revenue for them, which is awesome. And then finally, we were able to increase yield for them, right? Actually save them on food wastage and things like that, and that's meaningful, especially it's meaningful in any manufacturing space, but especially food, because 50% of revenue goes to raw materials. So I think it's a good example of kind of some of the ROI we've been able to generate.
I imagine too, like, and I love the idea of, because this is something I like to ask about a lot, is like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, 9 years ago, whatever, there was this common thread in the industry, or maybe in the world, that robots are here to take jobs. And it's all these reports have come out basically saying, well, yes, but no. And in fact, not really. Like, and a lot of times it's creating jobs. And now it's almost like people have gotten over that fear of robots, but now there's this fear of AI. Well, you're a company that's at the cross section of robotics and AI, and you're saying the same thing. Like, no, we're not necessarily taking jobs. We're giving people jobs that are no longer, I know it's cliche, dull, dirty, dangerous, and letting them go do something more valuable. And I venture a guess that, some of these people, I'll bet that your technology, at least high level, is designed so it's relatively easy to use, so that somebody who used to work on that floor can now operate an automated machine. Is that right?
100%. No, 100%. And honestly, like that's something we think a lot about. I think like there's a lot of automation that's honestly, like, I'm sure you've used it. It's like really quite hard to use. I mean, you need to be technical, or relatively technical and trained. I mean, we take a lot of inspiration from like consumer apps that you and I use every day, like Netflix. Like everyone can use Netflix. We like take a lot of inspiration from very simple user experiences like TikTok and Netflix and Facebook even, right? So yes, exactly. We designed our user experience to be extremely simple. It's like, okay, I want to run production. What meal am I running? What ingredient am I running? Okay, it's pre-populated with the portion size. Okay, great. The robot's going to say, hey, you need to get this utensil, get the C50 utensil. It says it right on the HMI on the dashboard. Plug in the C50 utensil, put in your pans of food, press play, run. That's it. It's like you teach somebody once for 5 minutes and then they're off to the races. And we think a lot about like, how do we actually, like, for example, do things that make this even simpler. So for example, the entire dashboard is in Spanish, which is very, language that many people in the food industry use. We can use it. We can obviously do any language you might want. It's mostly photos. It's not, even the text is limited. It's mostly photos or videos or GIFs and things like that. So exactly. I think like what we've seen is, by the way, this is not incidental. Like, it's like we were purpose, like we did work against this, but because we're so intentional,
yeah,
exactly like you said, those line workers are now becoming robot operators. They're becoming continuous improvement managers. These people know the business. Some of these people, like at Amy's Kitchen, one of our customers, they've been with the business for 20, 30 years. They've been with Amy's, let's say, for 20, 30 years. So they deeply know the business, but it's just that this job is redundant. So now, but previously Amy's had no choice. It's like, okay, like we don't have a choice. There's no automation that can do this. We just need people to do this. But now I think people are like, okay, well, if Chef Robots can do the manual assembly work, now we can repurpose those people and actually, like, let's optimize things. Let's go faster. Let's increase throughput. Let's figure out how to do better material handling and material flow. Let's figure out how to do better QA. Let's build other systems and processes and reallocate that labor. Let's open up a new line. Like, that's the kind of thing we're seeing. And these people are now kind of upgrading themselves too, up-leveling themselves too, where, they are now robot operators, which is awesome.
Yeah, and there's this funny irony there too. It's like automation can help businesses protect against the labor shortage, but in some ways, and I'm not gonna make the comment that automation can it can do this fully, but in some ways it can help bring in some of the human talent. I think anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because if I were a young person and I had no job and I'm looking for a job opening and there's two jobs, one of them is whatever, packing eggs.
Yes.
And the other is operating a robot that packs eggs. I'm going for that robot job.
100%. No, absolutely. And I think, one of the things we try to do is like really make the line associates really feel really bought in. Like, this is not a threat. It's a tool. It's literally a tool. Like, and we're going to teach you how to use the tool, right? So like, we'll do a lot of like small things that I think are quite meaningful. So like, whenever we ship a robot, we do like a little naming ceremony. Like, hey, like let's all kind of circle around the robot. Let's, like, you guys, not chef team, like the line associates. Like, what name do you want to give the robot, right? Of course, we do a full training, multiple trainings, and then yes, from a hiring perspective, it's been a great thing, because now it's like, yeah, like one of the first line items is like robot operator, or at least like interact with robots. Even if you're not operating the robot, you're around the robot, you're learning about it, you're learning what works and what doesn't work. That's very useful.
Yeah. No, this is really cool. We've talked about a lot, and there's a million questions that I could ask, but like I said, I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you feel would be important to mention today, when just in general?
I think, like, as a general trend, I think, like, zooming out, this is again a very macro statement. I think, like, to your point about young people, I think a lot of young people, my sense is they don't want to do manufacturing, right? They're more attracted to, like, like after high school, after college, like, let's do everything else, right?
Yeah.
Let's get a job at Uber, and not, let's drive Uber, let's do DoorDash, like what have you. And I think that's, of course, not great for the US, right? I think the US really does need manufacturing as a core strength. Historically, what's happened, as you know, is like we've offshored quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what COVID really taught us, and frankly, the rest, like many other countries, is how fragile our supply chain can be if we don't have production onshore. Right. And that's not just for food. Steel and semiconductors and, all iPhones and all the rest of it. So I just think that, especially as we are seeing that labor shortage in general manufacturing, I think robotics and AI is critical, because we do need to keep production onshore. It's critical to national security. And so I would just encourage, like, I think young people to, like, manufacturing is really cool. And I think, especially as you add AI and robots, it's actually like, it's really powerful. And I think that like, I think there's a lot of hype in AI robots right now about like robots in the home and robots in restaurants and robots in hospitals. My sense is that's more hype than reality right now. Like, I mean, even Chef, we are in food robotics. We could have gone to restaurants, but we decided to go to manufacturing. By the way, all the food robotics companies that went to restaurants are now dead. It didn't work. And we can talk about why that is. But robots aren't totally ready yet for the day-to-day world. And I hope they get there, not too far in the future because of all these advancements in AI. This moment, robots can be very successful in manufacturing. So, if you're young and you want to do AI robots, like manufacturing is the place to be. So I would just encourage like people to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's been this this narrative in the last few years of, people out there saying, the other thing to think about is even if you're not going in as, an engineer, if you go in welding, for example, right? Like there's some stat out there about all the skilled welders in the US are going to be retiring in whatever amount of years it is. I don't remember the stat off the top of my head, and automation has taken over. But like there are these jobs too where they're not just the people that are building robots or developing AI, but you can go and make a really, really good career, whatever it might be, welding or working on the plant floor or otherwise. And I just think that, it's important to reframe the idea of working in manufacturing as some sort of fallback, because it's absolutely not.
Yep. No, exactly.
Rajat, thank you so much for the time. It's been super interesting to talk to you. I really appreciate the time. If people want to learn more, I think it's chefrobotics.ai. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep, and everyone can check them out on LinkedIn and follow the latest happenings and events and cool case studies and videos and everything. Again, thanks so much. I really appreciate the time. If anybody has questions for Rajat, I'd be happy to take those. You can reach out to us via manufacturing-matters.com. And thanks for listening. And Rajat, once more, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. Super fun having this conversation.
Of course, my pleasure.